Dr. Sarah Mitchell had just finished her 14th hour on shift at Memorial General Hospital as the worst blizzard in Boston's history raged outside, whipping snow against the emergency room windows like tiny bullets. The piercing alarm of the automatic doors jolted her from fatigue as they slid open, allowing a massive mud-covered German shepherd to burst into the sterile environment. Something clutched desperately in its jaws. "Get that animal out of here now!" Nurse Thompson screamed, grabbing a broom as security guards lunged toward the trembling dog, its scarred body tensing while it dodged their grasping hands. 3 years after losing her baby in marriage, Sarah couldn't explain why she moved toward the animal rather than away. But when she knelt down and saw what was cradled in the dog's gentle muzzle, the world around her disappeared. Wrapped in a filthy, ice-crusted blanket was a tiny blue-tinged infant who had nearly stopped breathing. And what Sarah discovered in that moment made her blood run cold and would change everything forever. Leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments along with the city you're watching from now. Let's continue with the story. Memorial General Hospital sat on the outskirts of Oak Ridge, a small suburb of Boston that most people only pass through on their way somewhere else. Tonight, as the worst blizzard in 40 years wrapped the modest brick building in sheets of white, the hospital seemed more isolated than ever. Emergency generators hummed beneath the howling wind, keeping the lights on while the rest of the town had gone dark. Dr. Sarah Mitchell hadn't planned on becoming the night shift's most dedicated pediatrician. At 38, she had once imagined a different life, a house filled with children's laughter, a husband who'd grow old with her. But 3 years ago, a late-term miscarriage had taken her daughter, and shortly after, her marriage had crumbled under the weight of grief. Now, Sarah lived alone in a too-large house, working double shifts to fill the emptiness that followed her home each night. The German shepherd that had burst through the ER doors was clearly no stranger to hardship. Even from a distance, Sarah could see the patchwork of scars across his muscular frame, places where fur refused to grow back. His right hind leg showed signs of an old injury, healed improperly, causing him to favor his left side. Despite his imposing size, there was something dignified in his amber eyes, intelligence and purpose that couldn't be extinguished by whatever cruelty he had endured. The baby, who nurses had tentatively named Emma until her parents could be found, lay in the NICU fighting for her life. No more than 3 days old, her tiny body had been dangerously hypothermic when discovered, her lungs struggling against the cold that had nearly claimed her. Sarah couldn't help but notice how perfectly formed her fingers were, how they occasionally twitched in sleep as though reaching for something or someone. Nurse Jessica Thompson had been the first to try chasing the dog away. Tall and efficient, Jessica was known for keeping the ER running like clockwork. Though few knew her outside the hospital walls, Dr. Robert Anderson, the hospital's director, had already called twice, demanding the dog be removed from the premises immediately, citing health codes and liability concerns. Officer Michael Brooks stood in the hallway, notebook in hand, his broad shoulders dusted with melting snow. "In 20 years on the force," he said quietly to Sarah, "I have never seen anything like this. That dog saved her life. No question." The German shepherd had first noticed the strange bundle while searching for scraps behind Giovanni's Italian restaurant just after 6 a.m. The snow had been falling for hours, accumulating in drifts that reached halfway up his legs. He moved with caution, his injured hind leg dragging slightly through the fresh powder, since being abandoned 8 months ago. Max, the name on his worn collar that no longer carried tags, had developed routines for survival. Mornings were for the restaurant dumpsters before the staff arrived. Afternoons were for the park, where kind elderly visitors sometimes offered scraps. Nights were spent in the relative shelter of an abandoned car wash. The storm had changed everything. No park visitors, no restaurant workers tossing leftovers, just howling wind and a bone-deep cold that threatened to overcome even his thick coat. He had been circling the dumpster when a faint sound caught his attention, a whimper so soft it was nearly lost in the wind. His ears pricked forward, head tilting in concentration. There, half buried in the snow against the brick wall, lay a bundle wrapped in a thin blanket. The scent was unmistakable. Human, but different. Smaller. Vulnerable. Max approached cautiously, his natural wariness of humans fighting against something deeper, more primal, the instinct that had once made him an exceptional search and rescue dog. Before the accident, before his handler had abandoned him at the roadside with a damaged leg that made him useless, Max had specialized in finding those who were lost. Children in forests, hikers buried by avalanches, the elderly who had wandered from nursing homes. Something in his training, or perhaps deeper in his DNA, recognized the urgency of the tiny human situation. The bundle moved slightly. A miniature face, blue-tinged and wrinkled, appeared as the blanket shifted. The infant's cries were growing weaker, not stronger, a sign Max somehow understood wasn't good. Careful not to disturb the fragile contents, he gently took the edge of the blanket between his teeth. Max knew about humans who helped other humans. Before being abandoned, he'd accompanied his handler to buildings where injured people were taken. Even with a damaged leg and months on the streets, some memories remained intact, like the distinctive Red Cross sign and the smell of antiseptic. The journey through the blizzard was treacherous. The snow, already knee-deep, continued to fall in heavy, wet flakes that clung to his fur and added weight to his already exhausted body. Cars had stopped running hours ago, and the streets were ghostly quiet. Only the occasional snowplow broke the silence, forcing Max to press himself against buildings to avoid being buried in the wake of their passing. Twice, he had to stop, gently placing the bundle down to rest his aching jaw before continuing. The baby had gone silent, which filled him with an urgency he couldn't articulate but felt bone deep. The hospital was still 3 blocks away when he noticed the bundle had stopped moving altogether. Memorial General's emergency entrance was illuminated like a beacon in the darkness. Max summoned his remaining strength and pushed forward, his leg threatening to buckle with each step. When the automatic doors sensed his presence and slid open, the blast of warm air was momentarily disorienting. The bright lights and sudden noise of human voices after the silent snowfall made him hesitate. But only for a moment. The chaos was immediate. A woman behind a desk shouted. Security guards moved toward him. A nurse grabbed a broom, pointing it threateningly. Max's instinct was to retreat. The streets had taught him what happened when humans felt threatened by his presence. But the unmoving bundle in his mouth kept him rooted in place. "Get that filthy animal out of here," Nurse Thompson shouted, her voice sharp with authority. "This is a sterile environment, security." Max backed away from the approaching guards, his body lowering defensively. He wouldn't drop his precious cargo, wouldn't fail this tiny human who needed help more than he needed safety. His eyes darted around the room, searching for someone, anyone, who would understand. And then he saw her, a woman in a white coat, watching the scene with different eyes than the others. She wasn't afraid. She wasn't angry. She was curious. Dr. Sarah Mitchell had been updating charts when the commotion started. Unlike her colleagues, her first response wasn't fear or disgust at the animal's intrusion. 20 years of pediatric emergencies had taught her to look for what others missed, and what she saw was a dog that wasn't aggressive. It was desperate. "Wait," she called out, moving toward the standoff. "Don't chase him away yet." The security guards hesitated, glancing between Sarah and Nurse Thompson, who still held her broom like a weapon. "Dr. Mitchell, hospital policy clearly states," Thompson began. "I know the policy," Sarah interrupted, her voice calm but firm as she slowly approached the trembling dog. "But I need to see what he's carrying." Max stood perfectly still as the doctor approached, his eyes never leaving hers. When she knelt down a few feet away, he recognized something in her that he hadn't seen in humans for a long time. Kindness. "It's okay," Sarah said softly, extending her hand palm up, non-threatening. "I won't hurt you." With careful movements, she reached for the bundle. Max hesitated only briefly before allowing her to take it, his mission finally complete. The moment Sarah pulled back the edge of the ice-crusted blanket, the entire ER fell silent. The tiny face that appeared was blue-tinged and motionless, eyelids closed and crusted with ice, lips with a faint purple hue. "Oh my God," Sarah whispered, medical training instantly overriding emotion. "I need a warming blanket and a pediatric crash cart now." Her voice cut through the stunned silence, galvanizing the staff into action. As nurses rushed to her side, Sarah carefully cradled the infant, feeling for a pulse. It was there, faint and slow, but present. The baby girl couldn't have been more than a few days old, abandoned in a snowstorm that had already claimed 3 lives across the city. Behind her, Max had not moved, despite Nurse Thompson's renewed attempts to shoo him away. He remained seated, watching the activity with focused attention, as if understanding the urgency of the situation. "Get that dog out of here, now that we have the baby," Thompson insisted, reaching again for her broom. But as they wheeled the infant toward a trauma room, something unexpected happened. Max rose shakily to his feet and limped after them, his determination clear. When a security guard moved to block his path, the dog simply sidestepped him, his eyes never leaving the small form on the gurney. "Let him be for now," Sarah called over her shoulder, surprising even herself with the order. "We'll deal with him after we stabilize the baby." 3 hours later, baby Emma lay in an incubator in the NICU, a network of tubes and monitors surrounding her tiny form. Her core temperature had finally stabilized, though she remained in critical condition. Sarah stood by the incubator, studying the infant's stats on the monitor. The baby's survival was nothing short of miraculous. Another 30 minutes in that snow, and they would have lost her. "Dr. Mitchell," the deep voice pulled Sarah from her thoughts. Officer Michael Brooks stood in the doorway, notebook in hand. Salt stains marked his heavy boots, and melting snow still clung to his police jacket. "Got a minute to talk about our little Jane Doe?" Sarah nodded, giving Emma's incubator one last glance before stepping into the hallway. "Her condition is stable but critical. Severe hypothermia, early stages of frostbite on her extremities, and signs of dehydration. But she's fighting." Officer Brooks nodded, jotting notes. "Any identification with her? Anything at all that might tell us who she belongs to?" "Nothing, just the blanket, which isn't distinctive. Hospital grade. Actually." Sarah frowned, the details suddenly registering. The kind we use here or at any medical facility? Brooks raised an eyebrow. Hospital blanket. Huh. That's interesting. He made another note. We'll need to review security footage from surrounding areas. See if we can track where the dog found her. Speaking of the dog, Sarah asked, what happened to him? Animal control took him to the municipal shelter. Standard procedure. Brooks didn't meet her eyes. He was in rough shape, malnourished, old injuries, no tags, clearly been on the streets a while. Sarah felt a tightness in her chest. But he saved that baby's life. I know. Brooks sighed. I put a note in the file about what he did. But you know how these things go. If no one claims him in 72 hours... He didn't need to finish. Sarah knew exactly what happened to unclaimed strays, especially large ones with signs of previous aggression. The unfairness of it twisted in her gut. A hero one day, disposable the next. We've pulled the security footage from the hospital cameras. Brooks continued, changing the subject. Thought you might want to take a look. In the small security office, Sarah watched grainy black and white footage from the previous night. The timestamp showed 2:17 a.m., hours before the dog had arrived with Emma. The camera aimed at the hospital's rear service entrance captured a figure moving quickly through the snowstorm, carrying what appeared to be a small bundle. Can you zoom in? Sarah asked the security technician. The image enlarged, becoming more pixelated but still clear enough to make out a person in what looked like scrubs or a hospital uniform. The figure glanced nervously over their shoulder before placing the bundle behind a dumpster, then hurrying back inside through the service door, an entrance that required an employee badge to access. Someone who works here, Sarah whispered, her blood running cold. Someone abandoned that baby during their shift. Brooks nodded grimly. We're going to need a list of all staff working last night. The badge system will tell you exactly who accessed that door, the security technician added as they left the security office. Dr. Robert Anderson intercepted them in the hallway, tall and imposing with prematurely silver hair. The hospital director had a reputation for prioritizing Memorial General's public image above all else. Dr. Mitchell, I understand you've been spending considerable time with our abandoned patient. His tone suggested this was problematic. Given your, personal history, perhaps it would be better if Dr. Wilson took over the case. Sarah stiffened. My personal history has no bearing on my ability to provide care. Dr. Anderson. Of course not. He backpedaled smoothly. I'm simply concerned about your emotional well-being. This situation bears certain similarities to your loss. The casual reference to her miscarriage felt like a physical blow. 3 years had passed, yet Anderson wielded it like a weapon when convenient. Before Sarah could respond, Officer Brooks stepped forward. Doctor, Mitchell's insights have been invaluable to our investigation, he said firmly. I'd prefer she remain involved. Anderson's smile didn't reach his eyes. As you wish. But remember, Dr. Mitchell, this hospital has protocols. The media will be all over this story by morning, and we need to present a united front. After he walked away, Brooks turned to Sarah. Pleasant fellow. So he's concerned about lawsuits and publicity, Sarah said flatly. The fact that someone from this hospital might be involved will send him into damage control overdrive. That evening, after her shift ended, Sarah found herself driving to the municipal animal shelter instead of home. The logical part of her brain argued this was foolish. She worked 80-hour weeks, lived alone, and had sworn off any new attachments after her divorce. A dog, especially one with obvious issues, was the last thing she needed. Yet something about those amber eyes haunted her. The way he'd stood his ground in the ER, determined to complete his mission despite his fear. The intuition that had led him to bring the baby to people who could help. The shelter was nearly empty when she arrived. Just one tired-looking attendant manning the front desk. "We're about to close," he said without looking up. "I'm here about the German Shepherd brought in today," Sarah said. "The one who carried a baby to Memorial General." This got his attention. "Oh, that one. Yeah. He's in the back. Not very social, though. Growled at two of our handlers." "May I see him?" The attendant shrugged. "Your funeral." He led Sarah through a corridor of kennels where dogs barked and whined as they passed. At the very end, in an isolation kennel, lay the German Shepherd. Unlike the other dogs, he made no sound as they approached, simply watching with those intelligent eyes. His posture was alert but resigned, as if expecting nothing good. "Here he is," the attendant said. "No chip, no caller ID. Vet estimates, he's about 6 years old, former working dog, probably, has the build and training markers. See how he's positioned? That's military or police training." Sarah knelt by the kennel door. The dog's eyes tracked her every movement. "Hey there," she said softly. "Remember me?" His ears pricked forward slightly. Recognition. "What happens to him now?" Sarah asked, not taking her eyes off the dog. "We'll hold him for 3 days. See if anyone claims him. After that—" The attendant's silence finished the sentence. "And if someone wanted to adopt him, there'd be an evaluation first, given his size and condition. It wouldn't be easy to place him. Most people want puppies, not adult dogs with issues." Sarah nodded, still watching the dog. Something about him reminded her of herself. Wounded, but refusing to quit. Isolated, but still capable of compassion. "I'd like to fill out an application," she said finally. The attendant looked surprised. "You sure he's got a lot of baggage?" "So do I," Sarah replied simply. Later that night, Sarah dreamed of her lost baby for the first time in months. In the dream, she was searching through snow, calling a name she couldn't remember upon waking. When she opened her eyes at 3 a.m., her pillow was wet with tears. Reaching for her phone, she checked her emails and found one from Officer Brooks sent just after midnight. Security logs show badge access at the service entrance at 2:14 a.m. by employee ID number 4873. Working to identify owner. Also, found something interesting on the baby. Unusual birthmark on left shoulder blade, shaped like a crescent moon. Does that mean anything to you? Call me when you get this. Sarah sat bolt upright, suddenly wide awake. A crescent-shaped birthmark, just like the one her daughter had shown in her 20-week ultrasound, just like the one that ran in her ex-husband's family for generations. With trembling fingers, she dialed Brooks's number, not caring about the hour. As the phone rang, she pulled out her worn copy of the ultrasound photo, the last image she had of the daughter she'd lost. The birthmark was clearly visible, almost identical to how Brooks had described baby Emma's. "This can't be a coincidence," she whispered, as Brooks's groggy voice answered, I need to see that baby again. Right now. The next morning dawned clear and bright. The blizzard having moved offshore during the night, Sarah had barely slept after her call with Officer Brooks, her mind racing with possibilities that seemed both impossible and undeniable. She arrived at the hospital 2 hours before her shift, heading straight to the NICU to examine Emma again. The birthmark was exactly as Brooks had described, a crescent-shaped mark on the baby's left shoulder blade, nearly identical to the one visible in Sarah's ultrasound photo. She gently traced its outline with her finger, a chill running through her body despite the warmth of the NICU. Genetic markers like birthmarks can run in families. Dr. Wilson remarked, having entered the room quietly behind her. But they're rarely unique enough for identification purposes. Sarah nodded, not trusting herself to speak. David's family, her ex-husband's lineage, had passed down this distinctive mark for generations. He had shown her his own identical birthmark early in their relationship, joking that their children would be celestially branded. "Have you contacted your ex-husband?" Dr. Wilson asked gently. They had worked together long enough for him to understand the significance. "Not yet." Sarah straightened up, professional demeanor sliding back into place. "It's probably nothing. Coincidence." But as she left the NICU, Sarah's hand was already reaching for her phone. David had remarried last year. She'd heard through mutual friends. His new wife was younger, a nurse at Boston General. The possibility forming in her mind seemed ludicrous, and yet Dr. Mitchell, Nurse Jessica Thompson, approached, clipboard in hand, lab results for baby Jane Doe. "Thought you'd want to see them right away." Sarah thanked her, noticing how Thompson's eyes darted away when their hands briefly touched during the exchange. Something about the nurse's demeanor had shifted since yesterday, a nervousness that hadn't been there before. The lab results confirmed Emma was severely dehydrated but otherwise healthy. No congenital issues, no drugs in her system. A perfectly healthy newborn who, for some reason, had been abandoned in a snowstorm. Sarah's phone buzzed with a text from Officer Brooks. "Employee number 4873 equals Jessica Thompson. Coming to hospital now. Don't approach her." Sarah's eyes shot up, catching Jessica watching her from across the nurse's station before quickly looking away. Jessica Thompson, the same nurse who had been most aggressive about removing the dog from the ER. The same nurse who now couldn't meet her eyes. The same nurse whose badge had accessed the service door minutes before the baby was abandoned. Before Sarah could process this information, her phone rang, the animal shelter calling with unexpected news. Her adoption application for the German Shepherd had been fast-tracked due to special circumstances, and she could pick him up today if she wished. The shelter director had personally intervened after hearing about the dog's heroism from Officer Brooks. "He hasn't eaten since arriving," the shelter worker explained. "Won't take food from any of us. The vet thinks he's depressed." 3 hours later, after signing what felt like 100 forms, Sarah led the German Shepherd, now officially hers, to her car. The adoption counselor had suggested naming him, explaining that a name would help establish their bond and give him a new identity separate from his past. "Max," Sarah had said without hesitation, remembering the faded name on his worn collar. Some part of her felt he deserved to keep this one connection to his previous life. Max moved cautiously, still favoring his injured leg but seeming somehow more alert than at the shelter. He inspected her modest SUV with military precision before carefully climbing into the back seat when she opened the door. "We're going home first," she told him, feeling only slightly foolish for talking to him as though he understood. Then we'll head back to the hospital later. At her house, a modest colonial in a quiet neighborhood that had once been purchased with children in mind, Max conducted a similar inspection, limping from room to room, pausing occasionally to sniff a particular spot with greater interest. In the unused nursery, which Sarah had never been able to dismantle after her miscarriage, he lingered longest, his nose working overtime. "That would have been for my daughter," Sarah said quietly, standing in the doorway. "Her name was going to be Lily." Max turned to look at her, and Sarah was struck again by the intelligence in his gaze. He crossed the room and pressed gently against her leg, the first voluntary contact he had initiated. Emotion welled up suddenly, catching her off guard. She knelt and hesitantly placed a hand on his scarred head. He didn't pull away. "Looks like we both know something about loss," she whispered. While Max investigated the backyard, Sarah called David. They hadn't spoken in over a year, their divorce having turned bitter near the end. The call went to voicemail, not surprising given their history. "David, it's Sarah. I need to talk to you urgently about something. Unusual. Please call me back as soon as you can." She didn't mention the birthmark or baby Emma. Some instinct told her to keep those details private for now. After settling Max with water and the premium dog food she'd purchased on the way home, Sarah changed into fresh clothes and prepared to return to the hospital for her shift. To her surprise, Max became agitated when she gathered her keys and bag. "I have to go to work," she explained. "You stay here and rest." But Max stood firmly by the door, his body language unmistakable. When she tried to step around him, he moved to block her path again, not aggressively, but with clear purpose. "You want to come with me?" Sarah asked incredulously. "That's not going to work. Max, the hospital has rules." Max's steady gaze didn't waver. Something about his insistence triggered a memory. Sarah had once read about service dogs who could detect medical emergencies before they happened. Max had found and rescued an abandoned baby in a snowstorm, showing remarkable judgment and purpose. What if there was more to his urgency than separation anxiety? "This is probably a terrible idea," she muttered, retrieving the service dog vest the shelter had given her, just in case. It wasn't technically legal to pass off Max as a service animal, but something told her his presence might be important. When they arrived at Memorial General, Sarah braced for resistance. To her surprise, Dr. Anderson himself met her in the parking lot, his face grave. "We need to talk," he said, then noticed Max sitting alertly beside her. "What is that doing here?" "He's with me now," Sarah replied simply. "What's happened?" Anderson's lips thinned with disapproval, but he apparently decided this battle wasn't worth fighting. "Officer Brooks is here with a warrant. They're questioning Nurse Thompson right now." Inside, the hospital corridors buzzed with whispered conversations. Staff members fell silent as Sarah and Max passed, eyes following them with undisguised curiosity. Word had clearly spread about the abandoned baby and Jessica's possible involvement. Officer Brooks met them outside the conference room where Jessica was being questioned. His eyebrows rose at the sight of Max, but he addressed Sarah without comment about her new companion. "Thompson's denying everything," he said quietly. "Claims she lent her badge to her boyfriend that night because he'd forgotten something in her locker. Convenient excuse." "Do you believe her?" Sarah asked. Brooks shrugged. "Hard to say. She seems genuinely frightened, but not necessarily guilty. We're looking into the boyfriend now, guy named Craig Mercer. Has a record for drug possession and one domestic violence charge that was later dropped. Max had grown increasingly alert during their conversation, his focus shifting to the closed conference room door. A low, almost inaudible whine emerged from his throat. "What's with him?" Brooks asked. "I'm not sure," Sarah admitted. "He's been acting strangely since I mentioned coming back here." When the conference room door opened and Jessica emerged, escorted by another officer, Max's reaction was immediate and unexpected. He positioned himself between Sarah and Jessica, not growling but clearly on alert, his body tense and watchful. Jessica stopped short, her face draining of color at the sight of the dog. That's the dog from yesterday." "Yes," Sarah confirmed. "His name is Max." Something flickered in Jessica's expression. Recognition. "Max," she repeated softly, as if testing the name. For a brief moment, her professional mask slipped, revealing naked fear beneath. The moment passed quickly. Jessica squared her shoulders and continued walking, but not before Sarah caught her whispering under her breath, "I'm sorry." Later, checking on Emma in the NICU, Sarah found herself watching the baby with new eyes. The possibility that Emma might somehow be connected to her ex-husband seemed both preposterous and increasingly plausible. The birthmark, Jessica's strange behavior, the hospital blanket, pieces of a puzzle that didn't yet fit together. Dr. Mitchell, a lab technician, appeared at her elbow. "I ran those additional genetic tests you requested. Preliminary results show some markers consistent with familial relationship, but it's not conclusive. We'd need comparison samples for verification." Sarah thanked him, her mind racing. She'd ordered the tests on a hunch, using her authority as attending physician to expedite them if Emma truly was related to David's family somehow. Her thoughts were interrupted by a commotion outside the NICU. Max, whom she'd left with a sympathetic nurse at the station, was barking, the first time she'd heard him make more than a whine since meeting him. She hurried into the hallway to find Max straining against the nurse's grip, his attention fixed on a man standing by the elevators, a man Sarah recognized with a jolt of surprise. David. Her ex-husband looked much the same as he had during their marriage, tall and fit, with the same carefully styled dark hair and expensive clothes. He hadn't seen her yet, engrossed in conversation with Dr. Anderson. Max continued barking, drawing attention from staff and visitors alike. David glanced over, irritation crossing his features until he registered the dog's handler. His expression froze when he spotted Sarah. "Control that animal or remove it from the premises, Doctor," Anderson ordered sharply. Sarah hurried forward, placing a calming hand on Max's head, though he remained rigid under her touch. "David," she acknowledged, keeping her voice neutral despite her racing heart. "What brings you to Memorial General?" "Board meeting," he replied smoothly. "I joined the hospital board 6 months ago. Didn't you know?" She hadn't known. The revelation that her ex-husband now had a governance role at her workplace was disturbing on multiple levels. "We were just discussing the unfortunate incident with the abandoned infant," Anderson explained. "Given the potential for negative publicity, the board is taking a special interest." "Is that so?" Sarah maintained her professional demeanor, despite the alarm bells ringing in her mind. Max hadn't relaxed. If anything, his focus on David had intensified. "Tragic situation," David said, his expression appropriately concerned. "Anderson tells me you've been personally involved in the case." "The baby was brought to my ER," Sarah replied carefully. She's stable, but still critical. Something unreadable flickered across David's face. Any leads on the parents? Not yet. Sarah lied, watching him closely. Though we have some promising avenues of investigation, David nodded, checking his expensive watch. Well, I won't keep you. I'm sure you're busy. Nice seeing you. Sarah, control your dog. Would you? Not everyone appreciates animals in a hospital setting. As he walked away, Max finally relaxed, though his eyes tracked David until the elevator doors closed behind him. That was odd, Sarah murmured, scratching behind Max's ears. What got into you? The dog offered no explanation, but his reaction had been unmistakable. Max, who had remained calm and dignified throughout the chaos of the ER, who had shown no aggression despite his obvious mistreatment, had nearly lost control at the mere sight of David. That evening, Sarah received 2 calls in quick succession. The first was from Officer Brooks. "We've got a situation," he said without preamble. "Jessica Thompson didn't show up for her shift, and she's not answering her door or phone. Her car's gone from her apartment complex. You think she ran? Maybe. Or maybe something happened to her. We're trying to locate this boyfriend, Craig Mercer, but he seems to have disappeared too." The second call came from an unknown number. When Sarah answered, there was only silence on the line for several seconds before a female voice spoke, Jessica's voice, tight with fear. "Don't trust him," she whispered. "Jessica, where are you? Are you safe? The baby's birth mother is dead. He told me it was an accident, but—" Her voice broke. "I never thought he'd actually—" The line went dead. Sarah immediately called Brooks back, relaying the conversation verbatim. "We're triangulating the cell signal now," he informed her. "Stay put, Dr. Mitchell. Don't get involved beyond what you've already done." But as she ended the call, Sarah knew she would do no such thing. Max stood in the doorway watching her, as if waiting for a decision. Outside, fresh snow had begun to fall, covering the remnants of yesterday's blizzard with a new, pristine layer. "We need to check something," she told Max, retrieving her coat and car keys. 20 minutes later, they pulled up outside an upscale condominium complex in downtown Boston, David's building, the one he'd moved to after their divorce. Sarah hadn't been here since helping him move some final boxes 2 years ago. "I just need to rule something out," she explained to Max, who watched her with those intelligent eyes. "Then we'll go home, I promise." The doorman recognized her, greeting her by name with a surprised smile. "Dr. Mitchell, haven't seen you in ages." "Here to see Mr. Mitchell." "Yes," Sarah lied smoothly. "He's expecting me." "He's not in at the moment," the doorman informed her. "Left about an hour ago with Mrs. Mitchell. Said they were headed to their lake house for the weekend." The lake house, a property David had inherited from his parents in the Berkshires, about 2 hours west of Boston. Isolated, private, the perfect place to hide. "Did they have anyone with them?" Sarah asked casually. "I thought I might run into Jessica while I was here." The doorman's expression shifted subtly. "The nurse? Yes. She was with them. Seemed upset about something. Is everything all right, Dr. Mitchell?" "Everything's fine," Sarah assured him, her mind racing. "When did David and his wife buy their unit here? I've forgotten." "About 8 months ago," the doorman replied. right after they got married. 8 months, approximately the time it would take to conceal a pregnancy until delivery. As Sarah and Max returned to her car, her phone buzzed with a text from Officer Brooks. Cell signal traced to Berkshire County. Getting local PD involved? Do not attempt to investigate yourself. Sarah stared at the message, then at Max, who sat watching her expectantly. "We should listen to him," she said aloud, even as she started the car and headed west, away from Boston, toward the mountains. "This is a job for the police." Max gave a soft whine that sounded almost like agreement, settling into the passenger seat as if preparing for a long journey. Sarah's hands tightened on the steering wheel. If her suspicions were correct, if David's new wife had given birth to Emma, if the birthmark really did indicate a family connection, then Jessica's call had taken on a much darker meaning. "The baby's birth mother is dead. He told me it was an accident." "We're just going to drive by," Sarah promised herself and Max as the city lights faded behind them, "just to make sure Jessica is safe until the police arrive." But deep down, she knew that wasn't true. They were heading straight into danger, driven by a connection to baby Emma that Sarah couldn't explain but couldn't ignore. And somehow, Max seemed to understand this better than anyone. Darkness had settled over the Berkshires by the time Sarah's GPS directed her onto the unmarked private road leading to David's lake house. She killed the headlights and parked among a cluster of pines about a quarter-mile from the property, the fresh snow muffling the sound of her tires. "We're just going to look," she whispered to Max, who sat alert in the passenger seat, his ears pricked forward. "If we see anything suspicious, we call Brooks and wait for backup." The temperature had dropped well below freezing, and Sarah's breath formed crystalline clouds as she slipped out of the car. She retrieved a flashlight from her emergency kit, but left it unlit, allowing her eyes to adjust to the darkness. The nearly full moon reflected brightly off the snow, providing enough illumination to navigate the tree line bordering David's property. Max exited silently, immediately taking position slightly ahead of Sarah. His training was evident in the way he moved, purposeful but cautious, pausing occasionally to scent the air. His injured leg seemed less bothersome in this environment, as if the urgency of their mission had pushed physical discomfort to the background. The lake house came into view after a 10-minute trek through the woods, a sprawling timber and glass structure perched on a small rise overlooking the frozen lake. Light glowed from several windows, and 2 vehicles were parked in the circular driveway, David's Range Rover and a more modest Honda Civic that Sarah recognized as Jessica's car. "They're definitely here," Sarah murmured, crouching behind a large spruce tree at the edge of the clearing. Max's body suddenly tensed beside her, a low rumble, not quite a growl, vibrating in his chest. Before Sarah could react, he edged forward into deeper shadow, his eyes fixed on something Sarah couldn't yet see. Following his gaze, she noticed movement on the deck extending from the house toward the lake, a figure pacing back and forth, the ember of a cigarette glowing intermittently. Even from this distance, she recognized David's characteristic restless energy, the way he ran his hand through his hair when agitated. Sarah pulled out her phone to call Brooks, only to find the signal had dropped to nothing, a common problem in these remote areas. She would need to retreat to higher ground or back to the main road to make a call. As she prepared to back away, Max suddenly froze, his attention shifting to the far side of the house. Sarah followed his gaze to see a second figure emerging from a side door, a woman hurrying through the snow, glancing nervously over her shoulder. Jessica. The nurse clutched something to her chest as she headed toward her car, moving with the furtive haste of someone attempting escape. She had almost reached the vehicle when the deck door slammed open and David's voice cut through the night air. "Where the hell do you think you're going?" Jessica spun around, backing against her car as David stalked toward her. "I forgot something at home. I was just going to—" "Liar." David's voice was chillingly controlled. "Give me the file." "Craig has gone too far," Jessica replied, her voice trembling but defiant. "A woman is dead. A baby almost died in that snow. I can't be part of this anymore." "You've been part of this since the beginning," David countered, moving closer. "You really think anyone will believe you weren't involved? Your badge accessed that door. Your boyfriend delivered the baby. Your fingerprints are all over this." Sarah's blood ran cold. The pieces were finally aligning into a coherent, horrifying picture. "The baby deserves to be with her real mother," Jessica insisted, still clutching what Sarah now recognized as a medical file to her chest. "Rachel was never fit to be a mother," David snapped. "The drugs, the instability. Emma deserves better. We had an agreement. An agreement that didn't include Rachel ending up dead." Jessica's voice rose in pitch. "Craig was just supposed to bring the baby to us after the birth. That's all. Not whatever happened that night." "Keep your voice down," David hissed, grabbing Jessica's arm roughly. "You think I wanted any of this to get messy, but we're past that now. All that matters is protecting Emma and making sure nothing leads back to us. Now give me the damn file." The confrontation was escalating rapidly. Sarah glanced at her useless phone, then back at the struggle unfolding in the driveway. Without backup, without a weapon, she had no clear way to intervene safely. But she couldn't simply watch if Jessica was in danger. The decision was made for her when Max suddenly bolted from their hiding place, a blur of motion as he charged across the snowy clearing toward David and Jessica. "Max!" "No," Sarah called, but it was too late. David turned at the sound of paws pounding across packed snow, his face registering first confusion, then recognition, and finally alarm as the German shepherd closed the distance between them with surprising speed. "What the—" he began, releasing Jessica's arm to face this new threat. Max didn't attack as Sarah had feared. Instead, he positioned himself between Jessica and David, his posture unmistakably protective as he issued a deep, warning growl that seemed to vibrate through the night air. In the momentary confusion, Jessica scrambled backward, still clutching the file. David reached inside his jacket. For what? Sarah couldn't see. But the gesture was threatening enough that she abandoned caution and ran forward. "David, stop!" she shouted. All three heads turned toward her, David's expression morphing from surprise to cold calculation, Jessica's showing naked relief, and Max remaining vigilantly focused on the perceived threat while acknowledging his owner's arrival. "Sarah," David said, his tone shifting to one of practiced concern, "what are you doing here? This is dangerous. You need to leave." "I heard everything," Sarah replied, moving carefully to stand beside Max and Jessica. "About Rachel, about the baby, Emma, about what was supposed to be a private adoption that went very, very wrong." David's face hardened. "You have no idea what you're talking about. This is a private matter between Jessica and me. A misunderstanding." "The baby at the hospital," Sarah continued, watching his face carefully. "She has the Mitchell birthmark, your family's birthmark. That's how I knew she was connected to you somehow." Something ugly flashed across David's features. Always the brilliant doctor, aren't you? Sarah, always piecing things together. But this time you should have minded your own business. A woman is dead. David. An infant nearly froze to death. Tragic circumstances, he agreed with chilling calm. But nothing to do with me. Jessica's boyfriend has apparently been involved in some unsavory activities. Isn't that right? Jessica. Jessica's voice was barely audible. Craig said you promised him $50,000 to deliver the baby once Rachel gave birth. He said you knew people who could create false documentation, make it look like a legal adoption. And you believe the word of a drug dealer, David scoffed. The man has clearly implicated you to save himself. Then why are you here? Sarah challenged. Why is Jessica here? Why did you need that file destroyed? David's expression darkened. You always were too smart for your own good. Sarah, after we lost our baby, I never thought you'd recover. But here you are, still trying to save everyone. His hand moved inside his jacket again. Unfortunately, some situations can't be saved. The object he withdrew caught the moonlight. The metallic gleam of a handgun now pointed steadily at Sarah. David, she said carefully, raising her hands. Think about what you're doing. I am thinking, he replied coldly. I'm thinking about my reputation, my position on the hospital board, my future. Emma is my daughter. Rachel understood the arrangement. She was well compensated for carrying the child. Things only went wrong when she decided she wanted more money, threatened to expose everything. So Craig killed her? Sarah asked, trying to keep him talking while her mind raced for options. An accident. He claimed she fought him when he came for the baby. David's clinical description of a woman's death sent chills down Sarah's spine. By then, we had no choice but to proceed with the plan. Jessica's role was to create a paper trail showing the baby had been brought in as an abandoned infant. No connection to anyone. Everything would have worked perfectly if not for that damn dog. At the mention of him, Max's growl deepened. He remained positioned protectively, muscles coiled and ready. The weather was the complication, Jessica added, her voice steadier now. Craig panicked when the blizzard hit, couldn't make it to the hospital as planned. He left the baby behind the restaurant, thinking someone would find her quickly. Shut up, Jessica, David snapped. Instead, Max found her, Sarah concluded, glancing at the dog with newfound appreciation. He saved Emma's life and ruined everything else, David muttered. Now, both of you are going to get in Jessica's car. We're going to drive somewhere quiet to discuss how this ends with minimal damage to everyone involved. The euphemism wasn't lost on Sarah. In David's clinical mind, he was already calculating the most efficient way to eliminate the threat they posed. Officer Brooks knows we're here, Sarah bluffed. Local police are on their way right now. Nice try, David replied with a tight smile. Cell service is notoriously bad up here. That's why I chose this location in the first place. The standoff stretched for several tense seconds, the only sound the soft hiss of falling snow and Max's continuous low growl. Sarah measured the distance between them, calculating whether she could somehow disarm David before he fired. The odds weren't good. The decision was made for her when headlights suddenly swept across the driveway, illuminating the tableau in harsh white light. A vehicle was approaching fast up the private road, not police, based on the lack of flashing lights, but someone in a hurry. David's attention wavered for just an instant, his eyes flicking toward the approaching car. It was the opening Max had been waiting for. The German shepherd launched himself forward with explosive power, covering the distance to David in 2 bounds. David swung the gun toward this new threat, but Max was too fast, too focused. Years of professional training combined with primal protective instinct as the dog's weight slammed into David's chest, knocking him backward into the snow. The gun discharged with a deafening crack, the bullet harmlessly embedding itself in a nearby tree as Max's jaws closed around David's forearm, applying pressure without breaking skin, a trained hold rather than an attack. Sarah rushed forward, kicking the fallen weapon well away from David's reach as the approaching vehicle skidded to a halt in the driveway, spraying snow in an arc. The driver's door flew open and Officer Brooks emerged, weapon drawn. "Police, don't move!" he shouted. Advancing quickly, Sarah had never been so relieved to see anyone in her life. "Brooks, how did you—" "Your car has GPS tracking through its emergency system," he explained briefly, keeping his weapon trained on David while assessing the situation. "When you didn't answer calls and I saw your location, I contacted local PD and headed up here myself. They're about 10 minutes behind me." David struggled against Max's hold, his face contorted with fury. "Get this animal off me. It attacked me unprovoked." "That's not what I saw," Brooks replied coolly, glancing at Jessica. "Ms. Thompson, I believe you have something important to share." Jessica stepped forward, still clutching the file. "It's all here. Records of the arrangement with Rachel Wilson, payment schedules, false documentation prepared for Emma's adoption." Her hands trembled. "And texts from Craig describing what happened the night Rachel died." Brooks nodded, producing handcuffs as he approached David. "Max, release," he commanded. To Sarah's astonishment, Max immediately obeyed, backing away but remaining vigilant as Brooks secured David's wrists. "You trained police dogs before joining homicide," Sarah realized aloud. Brooks offered a small smile. 7 years in K-9 unit. I recognized Max's training markers right away. He's had extensive police or military training. Someone invested a lot in him before he ended up on the streets." As if understanding he was being discussed, Max returned to Sarah's side, pressing against her leg in a rare display of affection. "What happens now?" Sarah asked, the adrenaline beginning to ebb from her system, leaving her shaky and exhausted. "Now we wait for backup, get everyone's statements, and piece together exactly what happened," Brooks replied. "Based on what I heard arriving, we're looking at conspiracy, kidnapping, possibly accessory to murder, endangering a child in—" "Emma," Sarah interjected. "Her name is Emma. Is she really David's daughter?" David, now seated against his car under Brooks's watchful eye, laughed bitterly. "Ironic, isn't it? After all our failed attempts, after losing the baby, I finally have a biological child, only to lose her too. You lost her the moment you chose your reputation over her safety," Sarah replied quietly. "The moment you left her to die in that snow." Jessica approached hesitantly. "Craig was supposed to bring her straight to the hospital. The plan was for me to be working, to find her abandoned in the lobby. But the storm hit, and he panicked and—" Her voice broke. "I never wanted anyone to get hurt. I just needed the money. My mother's medical bills." "Tell it to the district attorney," Brooks advised, though not unkindly. "Cooperation will count in your favor." In the distance, the faint wail of sirens announced the approach of local police. Sarah knelt beside Max, wrapping her arms around his sturdy frame in a spontaneous embrace. He remained steady, allowing the contact in a way he hadn't before. "Good boy," she whispered against his scarred ear. "You saved her twice now." As red and blue lights began to flash through the trees, Sarah's thoughts turned to the tiny infant fighting for life in the NICU. Emma, a child connected to her through David's bloodline, through a birthmark they shared. A child who, like Max, had been abandoned by those who should have protected her, left to the mercy of fate and winter. "What will happen to her?" Sarah asked Brooks quietly as the first police cruiser pulled into the driveway. "That's for family court to decide," he replied, watching her face carefully. "Unless, of course, a blood relative were to petition for custody." The implication hung in the crisp night air between them. Sarah looked from Brooks to Max to the handcuffed form of her ex-husband, an impossible possibility beginning to take shape in her mind. The Berkshire County Sheriff's Department took over the scene with efficient precision, securing the lake house as multiple cruisers converged on the property. Sarah sat in the back of Brooks's unmarked car. A shock blanket wrapped around her shoulders despite her protests that she was fine. Max lay at her feet, his vigilance undiminished even as emergency lights flashed across his alert face. "You should be checked out at a hospital," Brooks insisted, handing her a steaming cup of coffee from his thermos. "That was a traumatic situation." "I'm a doctor," Sarah reminded him, accepting the coffee gratefully. "I know when I need medical attention." Through the window, she could see David being placed in a police cruiser, his expression coldly composed even in handcuffs. Jessica was speaking with a female detective, her shoulders hunched as she pointed toward the house, clearly describing something important. "They're executing a search warrant now," Brooks explained, following her gaze. "Based on Thompson's statement, there may be additional evidence inside, documents, communication with this Craig Mercer, possibly even evidence related to Rachel Wilson's death." Sarah nodded, the weight of the night's revelations settling heavily on her shoulders. "How did you know I'd come here?" Brooks offered a small smile. "You're predictable in your unpredictability, Dr. Mitchell. Once we traced Jessica's phone call and I couldn't reach you, I put it together. The GPS on your car confirmed it." "I'm sorry," she said quietly. "I know you told me to stay out of it." "Professional hazard," Brooks replied with unexpected understanding. "Doctors and cops share that trait. Can't stop trying to help even when we should." A tall man in a suit approached, conferring quietly with Brooks outside the car before departing. Brooks returned with a grim expression. "They found blood evidence in an outbuilding on the property," he informed her, keeping his voice low, "and a cell phone believed to belong to Rachel Wilson. This just became a homicide investigation officially." Sarah closed her eyes. The image of a young woman she'd never met suddenly vivid in her mind, Emma's biological mother, desperate enough to agree to David's arrangement, then changing her mind with fatal consequences. "What happens to Emma now?" she asked, the question that had been haunting her since the truth began to emerge. "Child Protective Services will take temporary custody while the investigation proceeds," Brooks explained. "After that, it depends on whether any family members come forward." Rachel's family being notified now. According to Jessica's preliminary statement, Rachel was estranged from her family in Michigan, had been for years. Sarah's phone buzzed, service apparently restored now that they were back near the main road. "Dr. Wilson from the NICU was calling. "Sarah, thank goodness." His voice came through, tense with urgency. "We've been trying to reach you. Baby Emma's condition has deteriorated significantly in the last hour. Her temperature is spiking, and she's showing signs of infection. We've started broad-spectrum antibiotics, but—" "I'm on my way," Sarah interrupted, already calculating the drive time back to Boston. "What are her latest stats?" As Dr. Wilson rattled off vital signs and treatment protocols. Sarah motioned to Brooks that they needed to leave immediately. He nodded, understanding the urgency without explanation. The next 2 hours passed in a blur of anxiety and sirens. Brooks, recognizing the medical emergency, activated his lights and escorted Sarah's vehicle back toward Boston at emergency speed. Max remained uncannily calm in the passenger seat, as if sensing the gravity of their mission. "Hang on, Emma," Sarah whispered as they sped through the night. "Just hang on a little longer." They reached Memorial General just after 3 a.m. Sarah rushed through the hospital corridors with Max at her heels, ignoring the startled looks from night shift staff. No one attempted to stop them, whether because of Brooks's police presence or the sheer determination in Sarah's face, she couldn't tell. The NICU was a flurry of activity centered around Emma's incubator. Dr. Wilson looked up as Sarah entered, relief flashing across his exhausted features. "Sepsis," he confirmed grimly, "likely from exposure. We've identified the pathogen and adjusted antibiotics, but she's struggling." Sarah approached the incubator, her heart clenching at the sight of the tiny infant, even smaller seeming now amid the additional medical equipment surrounding her. Emma's skin had a grayish tinge beneath the warm lights, her breathing rapid and shallow despite the ventilator assistance. "Latest blood work?" Sarah asked, slipping automatically into doctor mode even as her emotions threatened to overwhelm her professional detachment. For the next 4 hours, Sarah worked alongside the NICU team, drawing on every bit of her pediatric training and experience. Max settled in a corner of the room, watching with that same eerie focus, occasionally shifting position, but never leaving. Dawn was breaking when Emma's vitals finally began to stabilize. The antibiotics were working, her tiny body responding to the aggressive treatment protocol. Sarah stepped back from the incubator, suddenly aware of how exhausted she was, how her hands trembled slightly with the aftermath of adrenaline. "You should rest," Dr. Wilson advised, placing a supportive hand on her shoulder. "We've got her stable now." "You've done everything possible." Sarah nodded, too tired to argue. She found Brooks dozing in a waiting room chair, his tall frame uncomfortably contorted in the small space. "She's stabilizing," Sarah reported quietly as he blinked awake. "The next 24 hours will be critical, but the outlook is better." Brooks straightened, wincing as his back protested. "Good news. I've got some updates, too." Thompson's boyfriend, Craig Mercer, was apprehended trying to cross into Canada. He's being brought back to Massachusetts now. And David, not talking except to his lawyer, but with Thompson's testimony and the evidence from the lake house, he's facing serious charges. The DA is discussing whether to pursue accomplice to murder or conspiracy charges. Sarah sank into the chair beside him, Max settling at her feet. "I still can't believe it. David was willing to let his own daughter die rather than risk his reputation." "People surprise you," Brooks said quietly, "both with how low and how high they can go." He glanced meaningfully at Max. A nurse appeared in the doorway, her expression apologetic, Dr. Mitchell, there's someone from Child Protective Services here to speak with you. About baby Emma. Sarah's exhaustion vanished instantly, replaced by a cold knot of dread. Already, I thought they wouldn't need to intervene until she was medically cleared for discharge. Standard procedure in cases like this, Brooks explained gently. They need to establish a care plan while the legal situation is sorted out. The CPS representative was a tired-looking woman in her 50s named Maureen Donovan, carrying a worn leather portfolio and an expression that suggested she'd seen too many tragic cases. Dr. Mitchell, she began after introductions, I understand you've been deeply involved in this case from the beginning. I was the attending physician when Emma was brought in, Sarah confirmed. And you're also the ex-wife of David Mitchell, who appears to be the child's biological father. Is that correct? Sarah nodded, uncertain where this was heading. That creates a complicated situation, Donovan continued. Normally, we'd look first to biological relatives for temporary placement, but with Mr. Mitchell in custody and under investigation, and the biological mother deceased. She paused, consulting her notes. We're attempting to locate extended family on either side, but that will take time. What happens to Emma in the meantime? Sarah asked, the question catching in her throat. Foster placement once she's medically cleared. Donovan replied matter-of-factly. Given her medical needs, we'll be looking for a placement with specialized care experience. The word struck Sarah like a physical blow. After everything Emma had endured, abandonment, exposure, sepsis, to be handed off to strangers, however well-intentioned, seemed yet another cruelty. I'm a pediatrician, Sarah heard herself saying, the words forming before conscious thought. And I'm technically family, through marriage, if not by blood. Donovan's eyebrows rose slightly. Are you expressing interest in fostering the infant, Dr. Mitchell? Was she? The question echoed in Sarah's mind. 3 years ago, she'd lost her own child, and the grief had nearly destroyed her. Taking responsibility for Emma, a child connected to David, and all the pain he represented, seemed both impossible and, somehow, inevitable. Max pressed against her leg, a warm, solid presence grounding her in the moment. He had saved Emma twice without hesitation, without calculating risk or consequence. Perhaps there was wisdom in that. Yes, Sarah said finally, her voice steadier than she felt. Yes, I am. Donovan's expression remained neutral, but Sarah caught a flicker of something, approval, perhaps, in her tired eyes. I'll need to conduct a home study and background check. There will be interviews, paperwork, court appearances. It won't be easy, especially given your connection to the case. Nothing about this has been easy, Sarah replied, resting her hand on Max's head. But I think we're up to the challenge. 3 weeks after the dramatic events at the lake house, Sarah sat in the gallery of Berkshire County Superior Court, watching as Jessica Thompson took the stand. The preliminary hearing for David's case had drawn modest media attention, though the full story had been kept from the press to protect Emma's privacy. Max lay at Sarah's feet, now wearing an official service dog vest that Brooks had helped arrange through his K-9 unit connections. Jessica looked smaller somehow, her hospital scrubs replaced by a conservative blue dress, her hands trembling slightly as she was sworn in. The prosecutor, a sharp-featured woman named Andrea Lawson, approached with practiced confidence. Ms. Thompson, Please explain to the court your relationship with the defendant, David Mitchell. Jessica's voice wavered at first, then steadied. He was a member of the hospital board where I worked. His wife, Melissa, was a colleague of mine at Boston General before transferring to Memorial last year. And when did you become involved in their plan regarding Rachel Wilson's baby? 6 months ago, Jessica explained. Melissa confided that they had been trying to arrange a private adoption, but the mother, Rachel, was becoming difficult. She asked if I could help facilitate things at Memorial General when the time came. The testimony continued, each revelation more disturbing than the last. David and Melissa had found Rachel through a questionable adoption facilitator, offering her increasing sums of money to carry the pregnancy to term and relinquish the baby. When Rachel, 7 months pregnant, threatened to back out, they'd involved Craig to handle the situation. What had begun as a coercive private adoption had spiraled into something far darker. The original plan, Jessica continued, was for Craig to bring the baby to Memorial General after the birth. I would be working, would discover the abandoned infant, and no one would connect her to the Mitchells. They would then adopt her through proper channels, using their connections to expedite the process. What went wrong? The prosecutor asked. Jessica's composure finally cracked. Everything. Rachel fought back when Craig came to take the baby. He said it was an accident, that she fell and hit her head. By then we were all in too deep. Tears streamed down her face. The blizzard hit, and Craig panicked. Instead of bringing Emma directly to me at the hospital, he left her behind that restaurant, thinking someone would find her quickly. And if that German shepherd hadn't found her, Lawson pressed, she would have died, Jessica whispered. We all knew it, but no one did anything. We were all just trying to cover our tracks. Sarah's stomach clenched at the clinical description of events that had nearly cost Emma her life. Beside her, Brooks placed a steadying hand briefly on her arm. When David took the stand later that day, he was nearly unrecognizable from the confident, charming man Sarah had once married. His expensive suit hung loosely on his frame, his face gaunt from 3 weeks in custody. Only his eyes remained unchanged, cold, calculating, constantly assessing his surroundings for advantage. This is a tragic misunderstanding, he insisted, his voice carrying the same persuasive timbre that had once convinced hospital boards and patients alike. My wife and I were working with an adoption agency. We had no knowledge of Craig Mercer's criminal activities or his relationship with Ms. Thompson. Yet phone records show multiple calls between you and Mr. Mercer in the days surrounding Rachel Wilson's death, Lawson countered. Professional contacts only. He presented himself as a facilitator for the adoption, and the $50,000 transferred from your offshore account to Mr. Mercer's. David's composure wavered slightly. A legitimate adoption fee? The cross-examination continued for hours, David maintaining his innocence with practiced indignation. But the evidence mounted inexorably text messages between David and Craig discussing handling the Rachel problem, surveillance footage of David meeting Craig 2 days before Rachel's death, and most damning, DNA results confirming Emma was indeed David's biological child, not an adoption at all. He's going to try to blame everything on Melissa, Brooks murmured as they left the courthouse that evening. Classic narcissist playbook, shift responsibility to everyone else. Will it work? Sarah asked, dreading the answer. Not with the evidence we have. Craig Mercer has agreed to testify against him in exchange for reduced charges. Between his testimony, Jessica's, And the physical evidence. David's looking at serious time. Brooks hesitated. But there's something else you should know. They stopped beside Sarah's car, Max waiting patiently while Brooks gathered his thoughts. Melissa Mitchell was found dead in her cell this morning. Apparent suicide. The news hit Sarah like a physical blow. She was in custody. I didn't even know they'd arrested her. Boston PD picked her up yesterday based on evidence found at the lake house. She used her hospital scrubs to... Brooks trailed off, the details unnecessary. Sarah leaned against her car, suddenly lightheaded. Melissa, a woman she'd never met, who had been married to her ex-husband, who had apparently been willing to let a baby die to protect her reputation, was gone. Another death in Emma's tragic origin story. There was a note, Brooks added quietly. She confessed to orchestrating everything, finding Rachel through a patient at Boston General who ran an illegal adoption network involving Craig when Rachel threatened to back out, covering up the death. She claimed David knew nothing about Rachel's death until after the fact. You don't believe that? Not for a second. But it means his defense now has a convenient scapegoat who can't contradict his story. The implications settled heavily between them. David might still find a way to escape the most serious charges, might still find a way to claim parental rights to Emma. Despite everything. The next morning, Sarah received an unexpected visitor at her home. Maureen Donovan from CPS arrived, accompanied by a distinguished-looking older woman in an impeccable pantsuit. This is Judge Martha Calloway from Family Court. Donovan introduced her. She's been assigned to Emma's case and wanted to see your home environment personally. Sarah, caught off guard by the unscheduled visit, invited them in. Max, ever vigilant, positioned himself near Sarah but behaved with perfect decorum, something that didn't escape the judge's notice. Remarkable animal, Judge Calloway observed, watching Max. Officer Brooks explained his role in saving the infant. Twice, apparently. He's the real hero in all this, Sarah acknowledged, scratching behind Max's ears. The judge's inspection of Sarah's home was thorough but not unkind. She noted the newly prepared nursery, the baby safety measures installed throughout the house, and the pediatric medical reference books stacked on Sarah's desk. You've been busy, she remarked, returning to the living room after touring the upstairs. Emma could be discharged within the week if her progress continues, Sarah explained. I wanted to be ready. Judge Calloway nodded, her expression unreadable. Ms. Donovan tells me your home study was exemplary. Your background check likewise. Your professional qualifications are obviously beyond reproach. Something in her tone made Sarah tense. But there are complications. As I'm sure you're aware, your connection to the ongoing criminal case raises concerns. Your former relationship with the baby's biological father presents potential conflicts of interest. With all due respect, Your Honor, Sarah began carefully. My former marriage to David ended 3 years ago. Any emotional entanglement has been thoroughly severed, especially in light of recent events. Yet you've chosen to involve yourself deeply in this case, far beyond professional obligation. Because Emma deserves someone who will fight for her, Sarah replied, an edge entering her voice. Someone who puts her welfare above everything else. The judge studied her for a long moment. David Mitchell's attorney has filed a motion requesting that, if acquitted, his parental rights be preserved and Emma be placed with his parents, the child's biological grandparents, pending final custody arrangements. The room seemed to tilt momentarily. His parents, they live in Arizona. They're in their 70s. They haven't even come to see Emma once since all this happened. They're blood relatives, Judge Calloway stated neutrally. Family court typically prioritizes biological connections when possible, even when that biological connection involves someone implicated in the death of the baby's mother, someone who abandoned that baby to die in a snowstorm. Sarah fought to keep her voice level, despite the anger and fear rising within her. Max, sensing her distress, pressed against her leg in silent support. "The law is complex in these matters," the judge replied, her tone softening slightly. "And this case is unusual in many respects." Maureen Donovan, who had remained silent until now, spoke up. "There is another option we're exploring. DNA testing has identified a maternal aunt, Rachel Wilson's sister, in Michigan. She's expressed interest in custody." Another blow. "Has she met Emma? Does she understand the medical challenges ahead? The developmental monitoring that will be needed after the trauma of her first days?" "These are all factors the court will consider," Judge Calloway assured her, gathering her belongings. "For now, the temporary fostering arrangement remains in place. Emma will be discharged into your care while these legal matters proceed." After they left, Sarah sank onto the couch, the weight of uncertainty crushing her. She had known from the beginning that fostering Emma would be temporary, that permanent custody was a long shot given the circumstances. But in the weeks since finding the abandoned infant, something profound had shifted within her. The walls she'd built after losing her own baby had begun to crumble, allowing hope to seep through. Max rested his head on her knee, his amber eyes fixed on her face with that uncanny intelligence. "We're not giving up," she told him, drawing strength from his steady presence. "Emma deserves better than to be a pawn in David's games or shipped off to strangers, blood relatives or not." The irony wasn't lost on her once. She had desperately wanted David's child. Now, she was fighting to protect his child from him. Life's strange symmetry had brought her full circle, offering a second chance at motherhood through the most unexpected and painful path imaginable. Her phone buzzed with a text from Brooks. "Found something in Max's history. Need to talk. Coming by at 7. Sarah stared at the message, wondering what new complication awaited. Whatever it was, she and Max would face it together for Emma's sake. 3 months had passed since the night Max burst into Memorial General with a newborn in his mouth. Spring had finally arrived in Massachusetts, melting away the last remnants of the brutal winter that had nearly claimed Emma's life. Sarah stood at her kitchen window, watching the cherry tree in her backyard burst into pale pink blooms while Emma slept peacefully in the bassinet beside her. "Look at that sweet girl," she whispered, though Emma remained lost in the deep sleep of infancy. First spring blossoms. At nearly 4 months old, Emma had overcome her traumatic beginning with remarkable resilience. Though smaller than average for her age, she had developed a strong pair of lungs and a determined temperament that Sarah recognized from her own mirror. The crescent-shaped birthmark on her shoulder blade, the Mitchell family marker that had first connected her to Sarah, had darkened slightly as she grew, a permanent reminder of her complicated origins. Max padded silently into the kitchen, his nails clicking gently on the hardwood floor. His transformation had been no less remarkable than Emma's. The scarred, defensive stray had become a vigilant guardian, his military training evident in the way he positioned himself by Emma's bassinet whenever visitors arrived. The limp from his old injury had improved with proper veterinary care and regular exercise, though it would never fully disappear. A soft knock at the door announced Brooks's arrival. Since the dramatic events at the lake house, the officer had become a regular presence in their lives, his professional interest in the case evolving into a genuine friendship. "Brought breakfast," he announced, holding up a bag from Sarah's favorite bakery. "Figured you could use something that didn't require one-handed preparation." Sarah smiled gratefully. The reality of caring for an infant while maintaining her medical practice had proven more challenging than anticipated. Even with the reduced schedule, the hospital had approved. "You're a lifesaver." They settled at the kitchen table, Max assuming his customary position between Emma's bassinet and the door, a habit Brooks had explained stemmed from his military training. "How's our girl doing?" Brooks asked, nodding toward the sleeping infant. "Developmental assessment yesterday showed her right on track despite the rough start," Sarah reported with quiet pride. "Dr. Wilson says he's never seen such a remarkable recovery from neonatal hypothermia and sepsis. And the custody situation," Sarah's expression sobered, "still complicated. The hearing is next week. Rachel's sister Taylor is flying in from Michigan to meet Emma for the first time." Brooks nodded sympathetically. "And Mitchell's parents? Their petition remains active, though their attorney has indicated they might be willing to consider a shared arrangement." Sarah's tone made it clear what she thought of that idea. "They still haven't bothered to visit her." The legal battle for Emma had grown increasingly complex over the past months. David, awaiting trial on multiple charges, had initially fought viciously for his parental rights, seemingly motivated more by his need to control the situation than any genuine concern for his daughter. Only recently, as the evidence against him mounted and a plea deal appeared increasingly likely, had his focus shifted to ensuring his parents received custody, a transparent attempt to maintain indirect control. Rachel's sister Taylor had emerged as another claimant, her initial shock at learning of her estranged sister's death and secret pregnancy evolving into a determination to connect with her only remaining family member. The videos and photos Sarah had faithfully sent had fostered a tentative relationship between them, though Taylor's life in Michigan complete with 3 teenagers of her own complicated potential custody arrangements. Throughout it all, Sarah had remained Emma's foster mother, their bond deepening with each passing day. The temporary arrangement had been extended twice at Judge Calloway's discretion, influenced by Emma's medical needs and the pending criminal case against David. "Any word on the trial date?" Sarah asked, sipping her coffee. "Prosecution's pushing for July. Mitchell's attorney keeps filing motions for delay, but the judge is losing patience." Brooks hesitated, setting down his pastry. "That's actually part of why I'm here. There's been a development." Sarah tensed, automatically glancing toward Emma. "Craig Mercer amended his statement yesterday," Brooks continued. "He's claiming that David not only knew about Rachel's death in advance, but actively planned it. Says he has proof, recorded conversations that his attorney has been holding as insurance. Do you believe him? The DA does. Enough to offer a significantly reduced sentence in exchange for his full cooperation and the recordings." Brooks leaned forward. "If the evidence holds up, David won't just be facing conspiracy charges. We're talking first-degree murder." The implications hung heavily in the morning air. The father of the child Sarah had grown to love as her own might spend the rest of his life in prison for planning the murder of Emma's biological mother. "What does this mean for the custody hearing?" Sarah asked, her lawyer's instincts immediately focusing on how this would affect Emma. "Potentially everything. If David is charged with planning Rachel's murder, his parental rights would almost certainly be terminated. His parents' claim to custody would be severely weakened." A small, traitorous flutter of hope rose in Sarah's chest, which she immediately tried to suppress. Emma's welfare was what mattered, not her own desperate wish to keep the child who had healed her broken heart. "There's more," Brooks said, his expression uncharacteristically hesitant. "Remember when I texted you about finding something in Max's history?" Sarah nodded. The promised conversation had been delayed repeatedly by case developments, eventually fading into the background of more pressing concerns. "It took some doing, but I finally tracked down his original handler through his microchip registration and military records." Brooks reached into his jacket, withdrawing a folder. Max wasn't just any military dog. He was assigned to a specialized unit that trained dogs for both combat and search and rescue operations. He slid a photograph across the table. A younger, unscarred Max, standing proudly beside a uniformed woman, her face partially obscured by aviator sunglasses. His handler was Master Sergeant Rebecca Wilson. She was injured in an IED explosion 3 years ago. Max was wounded in the same incident that's the source of his leg injury. When she was medically discharged, she was supposed to adopt him, but there was a paperwork mix-up. Max ended up in a civilian training program instead. Sarah stared at the photo, a strange feeling creeping over her. Wilson? Like Rachel Wilson. Brooks nodded gravely. Rebecca Wilson was Rachel's older sister. Taylor and Rachel's middle sibling. The revelation landed like a thunderbolt. "Are you saying Max belonged to Emma's aunt? The same explosion that ended Rebecca's military career injured Max." According to Taylor, Rebecca's death 6 months later from complications was what sent Rachel into the spiral of addiction that eventually led her to David's twisted adoption scheme. Sarah looked at Max with newfound wonder. The German shepherd gazed back calmly, seemingly unaware of the bombshell Brooks had just dropped. All this time, they had assumed Max finding Emma was random chance, a stray happening upon an abandoned infant. But what if it had been something else entirely? That's incredible. Sarah breathed. "Does Taylor know about this connection?" "I told her yesterday." She was shocked, to say the least. Apparently, Rebecca and Max were inseparable. "The family has photos of him all over Rebecca's apartment." Emma stirred in her bassinet, making the small mewling sounds that preceded waking. Max was immediately alert, moving to position himself where he could see her face, his tail wagging gently as she opened her eyes. "So what happens now?" Sarah asked, lifting Emma into her arms. "Taylor is bringing Rebecca's photos and service records when she comes next week. She wants you to have them, to understand Max's background better." Brooks hesitated. She also mentioned that seeing this connection Max finding and saving Emma has made her reconsider her custody petition. "What do you mean?" "She called it meant to be, you and Emma finding each other through Max. Said it felt like Rebecca was somehow watching over her niece, making sure she found the right home." Tears pricked at Sarah's eyes as she looked down at Emma's face, then at Max's watchful form. The series of extraordinary circumstances that had brought them together suddenly seemed less like random chance and more like an impossible choreography of fate. The custody hearing the following week was unlike anything Judge Calloway had presided over in her 30 years on the bench. Taylor Wilson arrived with a binder full of photographs documenting Max's life with her sister Rebecca, the same dog who now sat calmly beside Sarah in the courtroom, wearing his service vest with quiet dignity. David's parents attended via video conference, their Arizona home visible in the background. They appeared uncomfortable throughout the proceedings, especially when Taylor testified about Rebecca's military service and the remarkable connection between her service dog and the infant at the center of the case. When Taylor formally withdrew her petition for custody, instead offering her full support to Sarah's adoption application, even the usually stoic Judge Calloway appeared moved. After seeing the extraordinary circumstances that brought Emma to Dr. Mitchell, Taylor explained, and understanding the role my sister's dog played in saving her life, I believe this is what Rebecca would have wanted. Emma has found her home already. David's parents, perhaps sensing the shifting sentiment in the courtroom, withdrew their petition shortly after, negotiating only for occasional visitation rights as Emma grew older. As Sarah stood on her porch that evening, Emma sleeping against her shoulder and Max sitting protectively at her feet, she watched the sunset paint the spring sky in shades of pink and gold. The journey had been unimaginable from loss and grief to this new beginning, from a blizzard's deadly cold to the warmth of renewed purpose. "We made it," she whispered to both her charges. "We're home." Max looked up at her words, his intelligent eyes seeming to understand the significance of the moment. 3 lost souls, brought together by tragedy but bound now by something stronger, a family forged not through blood, but through the fierce protection of love, in a world that often seems cold and indifferent. Stray dog bursts into hospital, reminds us that miracles still happen when we least expect them. This extraordinary tale of a wounded German shepherd who saves an abandoned infant speaks to the unbreakable bond between human and animal companions, a connection many of us have cherished throughout our lives. As we reach our golden years, we understand better than most that life's greatest blessings often emerge from our deepest sorrows. Sarah's journey from heartbreaking loss to unexpected motherhood mirrors experiences many of us have faced: the pain of dreams deferred, the challenge of starting over, and the courage to open our hearts again despite past wounds. Max's unwavering loyalty and Emma's innocent resilience remind us that family isn't always defined by blood, but by those who stand beside us through life's fiercest storms. In our generation, that witnessed so much change, this story reaffirms what we've always known to be true, that sometimes the most profound love comes in unexpected packages, and it's never too late for a new beginning. Like Sarah, Max, and baby Emma, we too can find renewed purpose and joy, even after life's most difficult chapters.